because we all perceive the reality around us in a different way, and therefore we perceive situations different. For example, also what is a stressful situation for myself doesn't have to be stressful for you.
Hello and welcome back. Now, just before we get started, if you're watching this on the Total Somatics YouTube channel, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and press the notification bell. So whenever I drop an episode out, you're the very first to find out. Now, just before I introduce our very special guest today, I just want to say welcome to all the new members that have recently joined the Total Somatics membership. It's lovely to have you in the membership, and just get yourself familiar within the membership. I'm there to support you every step of the way. But the thing is, what we have today is a very special expert that we're going to chat to. Her name is Larissa. And Larissa's been incredibly kind, and she's just recently held a workshop for the Total Somatics members. So if you are new in the membership, please go into the experts lifestyle section, because this podcast today is going to marry up beautifully with Larissa's workshop, which was excellent. Lovely comments there from the people that have watched it live. Okay, so let me just give you a little bit of an introduction, and then I'm going to bring Larissa in. So Larissa is a certified epigenetics coach. She's also an integrative health practitioner and a TEDx speaker. She was born and raised in Germany, and she decided to make this decision to follow her heart and move to beautiful Australia in 2022. And away from those societal, I can't say the word, but the societal and expectations that she had, she decided she wanted that time, that space, just to really figure out what she truly wanted. And also in life, where did she want to go? Where were her passions going to take her? So, really spending that time to reflect, she started following her interests, and she discovered her passion was epigenetics. And so, really, what she's looked at is how current generations and future generations can be impacted by this amazing science. And so, this really helped her find a beautiful institute she's created, and it's called Heart Wanderers Institute. And really, it's there to help guide people back to letting their mind wander, and also letting that intuition come into play. And the workshop shared that beautifully, because sometimes we can be so stuck in other factors that when we come back to what we need internally, and it really is that embodiment, that's where we can really make changes to our health. So this is why it's a really fascinating subject. So she's one of Australia's youngest epigenetic health revolutionists, and she travels all around Australia, speaking at retreats, at wellness events, and also she coaches people online on how to regulate their genes in order to stay healthy or to get healthy. So I would like to introduce to you Larissa. So welcome to the show, Larissa.
Thank you so much. That was an amazing introduction.
Oh, bless you. Well, it was well worth it, because you're very clever, and that talk was, the workshop you did today was absolutely brilliant.
Thank you. Thanks. I appreciate having given the chance to be here to talk about my passion, and to hopefully kind of light the passion for epigenetics in a lot of other people too.
Oh, brilliant. Well, I was going to say, Larissa, for somebody that's brand new to the subject of epigenetics, is it possible to kind of give a bit of a simple explanation of what epigenetics is, please?
Yeah, of course. So I try to keep it simple. So unlike the common misunderstanding, I would call it, that the genes we inherit from our parents are set in stone, the science of epigenetics has found that this is just simply not true. So yes, we still do get our genetics from our parents, but I would say they function more as a blueprint, and they're waiting to get activated or not. And this is where epigenetics comes into play. So scientists have found that there are molecular mechanisms that are sitting on top of our DNA. And that's, by the way, where the name epigenetics come from, because epi means on top, so on top of our DNA. And it is exactly those mechanisms that decide whether a gene gets activated or not. So instead of our genes turning on and off or expressing themselves, which is like the word for it, randomly, it is those epigenetics mechanisms on top of our DNA that control our genes' activity. And you may wonder now maybe how, on the other hand, those mechanisms know how to regulate the genes. And I think the answer is simple, but also very astonishing. It is through signals from the environment. And by that, I mean the inner environment, but our inner environment gets influenced a lot through our outer environment, which is why both environments are involved. So, just maybe to summarize, epigenetics looks at signals from our environment, inner and outer environment, that influence the mechanisms which regulate our genetic function.
Brilliant. And how would you say that, if we're looking at how these genes are operating, if we consider like environmental factors, because that's what you were discussing a lot within the workshop, how do you feel that they are influencing like gene expression? So, like stress and diet, those sorts of things. How do they influence, obviously, because of this whole process with epigenetics?
Yeah, so we now know that the mechanisms that are responsible for our gene regulation are controlled by the signals from the environment. And like this, it becomes more and more clear why stress, diet, physical activity, but also our emotions and our thoughts are important factors to look at. And why is that? Because they all form the environment that we're talking about. So stress, for example, puts our cells, which is where our genes are located, into survival mode and decreases all cellular functions to only the most crucial ones. And this kind of activity or non-activity sends a different signal to our genes as a cellular environment that is thriving. Also, when we have a diet that is full of vitamins, minerals, healthy fats, and so on, our inner environment is a different one than from a diet that consists of a lot of sugar, processed foods, pesticides, maybe herbicides, and all the nasty stuff that's in our food nowadays. And since emotions and thoughts, when we break them down, are nothing else than chemical structures and electrical impulses, they also add to our environment the epigenetic mechanisms are exposed to. So I know it first may sound a little bit overwhelming, but like knowing that every tiny factor kind of influences the way our genes act. But this is also, in my opinion, where the good or even the amazing news are, because since we can control these factors like stress, like our stress management, like our stress levels, we can control our diet, we can control how much we move, how much sports we do, we can actually control our emotions and our thoughts. And since we can control all these things, we can actually influence our environment and how it looks like, and therefore we can control how our genes are getting regulated. And I would just say that epigenetics enables us to leave the I'm the victim of my genes mentality behind and kind of puts us back into the driver's seat of our own health. And also the health of future generations too, by the way.
Yeah, well, that's interesting you say about the future generations, because I was going to say, with the role of epigenetics, you mentioned, I think you might have mentioned here or in the workshop, because we've covered so much
Yes.
in the session, how people used to say you were set in stone with what you had for your genetics. But how would you say this, like, intergenerational health and lifestyle aspects, how does that marry up, or how can we change the coding, as it were?
Yeah. So yeah, this is a very interesting one. But maybe let me ask you a question to clarify that. So how many generations are standing in front of you when you look at a pregnant woman? What do you think?
How many generations? So we've got a pregnant mum,
Yep.
we've got the pregnant mum, we've got the baby, we've got if it's the baby's genes as well. And I suppose you're looking at the pregnant mum and you're seeing her traits from her mother.
Yeah, yeah, on the one hand, definitely, but just standing in front of you in 50%, it's three generations. In the other 50%, it's two. But why? Because if the mom is having a girl, like pregnant
Yeah.
with a girl, then the eggs of that girl are already developing while being in the womb. So why is that relevant? Because the lifestyle choices that mother makes is not only affecting the epigenetics of the girl that she's pregnant with, but also her potential grandchildren or the potential children of that girl. So everything we experience or eat, do, think, feel, has an impact on future generations.
Yeah.
And what might sound like, again, a lot of responsibility, is, in my opinion, a massive chance for us to lay the basis for a healthier and therefore also happier society. And by making mindful choices in our life, we have the power to create this groundwork for our children's and even grandchildren's health. For example, there's a study that was conducted in Brazil, and this study showed that when grandmothers were exposed to a lot of emotional stress during their pregnancy, it impacted their grandchildren's gene function of the gene that's responsible for cardiovascular health. So, in other words, those grandchildren turned out to have way more heart diseases than, for example, grandchildren of grandmothers that weren't exposed to emotional stress during their pregnancy. And then also another study that was conducted on mice in Switzerland showed that the offspring of traumatized mice showed the same behavior. So, for example, depression, anxiety, all these kind of things, like their parents. And even if they themselves, the offspring themselves, did not experience the trauma. And the fascinating part, I think, is that this behavior, depression, anxiety, was shown for multiple generations after the initial generation. So trauma definitely can be inherited epigenetically and cause health problems in the following generations. But as I said earlier, also, it's not always trauma. It can also be lifestyle factors that influence the epigenetics of our offspring on the same level. Yeah.
Well, that's brilliant because it kind of makes me think, when you say about lifestyle aspects as well, how that kind of goes. Because I'm thinking to myself how, like with epigenetic changes, how does that relate to, say, the chronic conditions like obesity or diabetes or any cardiovascular diseases, just because you were talking about that aspect and it kind of flows on really.
Yeah. So, in general, generally speaking, epigenetic changes occur when the signal that our mechanisms on top of our DNA receive changes, which means that the environment has to change. So, a changed environment means a different gene regulation. And what I think is interesting is that only 2 to 5% of diseases are really genetically related. And the rest of all disease is due to lifestyle and environmental factors, which I think is a really big number, 95 to 98% it is. And especially obesity and diabetes type 2, but also cardiovascular disease, are really good examples for this, because through a certain environment that we have created over time, the genes that should be muted, for example, in order to guarantee a long and a healthy life, are getting regulated in the wrong way. And all of a sudden, chronic conditions appear. The good news about this is that since we can influence the environment in which our epigenetic mechanisms act, we can actually reverse certain regulations, certain gene regulations. And then we can also mute the genes that should be muted or activate the ones that are needed to be active. So, for example, we want tumor suppressor genes to be active instead of being muted. Yeah.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I enjoyed that in the workshop when you showed that image, and you said about that little part above the gene and how that's the part that
Yeah.
mutes it. But that's really interesting that, yeah, we want certain ones to be really active and other ones to quieten down, because that's the thing, is how can we positively influence our genes, as we know, and really use that process of epigenetics, the whole aspect of it, the whole subject. How can we influence it to make ourselves feel better?
Yeah, so there are a lot of ways. Basically, I would say have a look at every area in your life. Ask yourself, how is your diet? Do you have a nutrient-dense diet? Do you eat healthy fats and a lot of protein? Do you have minerals, vitamins? But then also, how's your sleep? Do you wake up rested and full of energy? Do you have enough time to balance your nervous system? How often do you move your body? Do you do sports? Are you stressed a lot? Which activities relax you? All these kind of things. But then also have a look at the emotional side in your life. So, how do the relationships in your life look like? Do you feel like you live a lot in the past, which means do you recall a lot of past experiences or past situations? Do you have a lot of self-doubt going on or like inner self-talk that is kind of sabotaging you? So all these kind of things influence the way our genes are getting regulated. And by creating an environment in which our cells and genes can thrive, we enable healthy gene expressions. But yeah, I would say ask yourself all these questions, have a look at every area in your life, and then see where you can maybe improve or change a little bit. And it doesn't have to be the big improvement overnight. It is important just to go step by step by step by step.
I think it's more realistic, isn't it, when it's just
Yeah.
that gradual. I was only saying to somebody here in the clinic the other day that, if you look back over the last like 10 or 20 years, those little changes you made in your lifestyle, you look back and you think, wow, I used to drink this, or I used to eat this, or I used to do this, and I don't do that anymore. And you just realize how, when it's done gradually like that and little bits at a time, it's easy to sustain, isn't it, or to commit to that as a long-term lifestyle change. And that's the thing I was going to ask, is that it kind of leads on to, when you think of like how dynamic we are and how we're constantly evolving and changing, and our bodies are adapting. So because we now know having more of a growth mindset is really healthy and everything for us, we kind of know now that, as I mentioned before, we're not kind of set in stone or rigid with everything. So, when you're looking at how we've moved forward in science, what are some of the common misconceptions about epigenetics that you think needs to be kind of clarified? Because, some people are still hanging on to the old science, not realizing that we are dynamic. We do change. Our bodies shift all the time. What would you clarify as those misconceptions?
Yeah. So what I would mention at this point is definitely that we are at the moment living in a time where a lot of paradigms are changing, and paradigms in all kind of areas. And I don't know if everyone knows what a paradigm is, but you can just define it as a set of beliefs or a set of belief systems that a society has about something. And so far, there was like the ongoing paradigm of genetic determinism, which basically said that exactly what you just said, that our genes are set in stone. We get them from our parents, which still is true. We do get our genes from our parents, but you can't do anything about them, and they just turn on or off randomly. Again, you can't do anything about that. You're basically just the victim of the genetic cards you got dealt with. And now there's this change from this genetic determinism to epigenetics, where you are more the creator of your environment, of your inner environment, and therefore you create the genetic outcome. And that gives us definitely the power back over our own health. As we said earlier, it also gives us the power, or at least the basis, to create a healthy groundwork for our children and our grandchildren. And I think, yeah, that's just fascinating, and everyone should at least know about it, and then, yeah, make their own decisions. But also, I think one other misconception, because there are not yet that many misconceptions about epigenetics, because it's not really that much known, the topics, or not many people have heard of it yet. But one misconception that kind of goes a little bit hand in hand with it is that thing that we, especially at the doctors, if they ask us, okay, which diseases are running in your family, because we kind of still think that if, for example, cancer runs in my family, it is most likely that I will get it too, because it's in my genes. But this is where the misconception lays. There is no such a thing as a cancer gene, which I think is very important to know. So yes, there are certain genetic predispositions to cancer, but less than 10% of cancer has any hereditary linkage of all. And the other 90% or more of cancer is simply just a direct response to the environment and the perception of the individual in that environment. And I think that's very powerful.
Yeah. It is actually, and I kind of, if that's the factors as well, it makes you think about as we grow older, how that's, how can we influence our the aging process as well, really, because that's the thing, it's all those factors as well. Sometimes we just put everything down to age, but then if our lifestyle and our choices can slow down that aging process, is that possible when you look through that lens of epigenetics?
Yeah, it definitely is. So I think that's also a cool thing about epigenetics, because it just opens up the possibility to influence our aging process by creating that healthy environment. So, for example, there's also a test called, I think it's called epigenetic clock, that shows if our biological age relates to our actual age. And when we do that test, it can tell you if you are aging the way you should, or quicker or slower. And by just knowing this, we can adapt our lifestyle and slow down our aging process. And particular tools in order to do so would be, for example, include definitely movement. Even if you're getting older, just walking is already good enough. Walk every day. Stretching, gentle movement, somatic movement, all these kind of things is already like really good, and yeah, should be included into everyday life. But then also a big one is that you have a purpose. Even if you stop working when you're older, if you're retired, it is so important and essential that you still have a purpose in life, that you still have something that it's worth living for, worth getting up for. And then also, of course, having a nutrient-dense diet is always a good idea, especially when it comes to aging. Having enough time for rejuvenation and regeneration, which means having a good sleep. Also finding gratitude in everyday life, because gratitude has to be shown to increase telomere length, which has to do with our aging. Being exposed to sunlight, then also meditation. And the beauty about meditation is that it doesn't always have to be the meditation we imagine, like just sitting there with our legs crossed, eyes closed. Yes, if you like that kind of meditation, perfect, nothing against that. But there are also so many other ways of meditation. Like, for example, you could have a shower meditation, which means that next time you have a shower, you close your eyes and you activate your five senses and really take in that experience of having a shower. Like, what do you smell? How does the water feel on your skin? All these kind of things. Or if you're a fan of having walks outside, you can really, instead of letting your mind wander during the walk, you can really focus on the current moment and activate your five senses again and be like, okay, what do I see around me? Which beauty do I see? What is there to be grateful for? What do I smell? All these kind of questions. Or even if you're a fan of dancing, you could just chuck on your favorite song and dance without thinking of anything else but the actual present moment. So meditation has like really a massive impact, and I feel like it is even for people that are older, it's always somehow easy to implement into everyday life. And then also being part of a community, also really big one. And this is the most undervalued factor when it comes to longevity. And it does something with our cellular environment. It creates oxytocin, the bonding hormone, the love hormone. It creates dopamine, and yeah, it just creates the feeling of being loved and being needed also. So yeah, that's all factors that create an environment in which our cells can live for a long time.
It's pretty incredible, really, isn't it? I mean, we were chatting in the workshop about you were saying you've seen water as an example for vibration and frequency. And I'd seen on YouTube about a scientist putting grains of sand on like a piece of metal, and they would just play different frequencies and those frequencies is what they've married it up to the different emotions. And you'd see all that beautiful design of a beautiful pattern for love or gratitude, and then you see this really disorganized pattern for anger. So it's incredible because it is all about vibration and frequency. And then you made that brilliant point about the water. Is it all right to elaborate on that, because we were chatting about that in the workshop and I thought it ties in so well, really?
Of course, of course. So there was this one experiment or study, I think it was in Japan. And they basically, because the thing is that our human body is made up of 75% water. And they just wanted to know how our words, and also our thoughts, like I think sometimes they didn't even use words, but just thoughts, are affecting water. And then they had one glass of water, which they treated very nicely, which they spoke really nice words of love, joy, and gratitude to. And then the other glass of water, where they sometimes even ignored the water at all or didn't show them any nice attention. Sometimes they even insulted the water. And then they had a look under the microscope, and it was like very similar to what you said with the sand. The structure of the water was completely different, and it looked like beautiful snowflake like patterns in the ones that you spoke love and affection to. And then the other structure was just like distorted and really chaotic, and yeah, not nice at all. And yeah, I think it's a powerful example for what words can do to water, which means also to us, because as I said, we are most of the parts of water, but also, yeah, frequencies, sound, vibration, all these kind of things that in the end the universe consists of. Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. I was thinking, because we've mentioned that, but have you got any kind of examples of any like research or any case studies to highlight like that practical application of how like epigenetics has worked in medicine or in wellness? Because that's such a great example. But I thought, is there anything else that you can think of along those lines?
Yeah, so I actually have two that I would like to mention, because one is more like from the transgenerational epigenetic point of view. I know I already mentioned some, but I feel like this one is also very interesting. So there was this Dutch famine, I think it's called, in 1944, where a lot of people were just starving and didn't have a lot of food available, and children that were born in that time or even after that time were having a lot of. So number one, they were born very, very small, which is not really surprising at first, because obviously their mothers didn't have enough nutrition available, they didn't have enough food. So that's not the surprising part. But in the adult life of these children, they had a lot of health problems, which then were related to the undernutrition, I'll call it. But the very surprising part about this is when those children were old enough to give birth to their children still were very small when they were born, even if the children themselves didn't had to suffer from hunger. They had a lot of food available. So it is kind of the trauma, or like the experience that the moms, or the grandmoms in that case, had, that still got inherited epigenetically down to the grandchildren, also being very small at birth, even if like their parents didn't suffer from any of those conditions, which I think is a powerful example. And then when we have a look at the epigenetical lens, or through that lens, so for example, there's a study of Dr. Joe Dispenza, which maybe a lot of people may know. And so during that study, they measured the amount of cortisol, which is our stress hormone, in the blood, as well as immune globulin of participants. And immune globulin is one of the strongest agents in our body to fight bacteria, viruses, fungi, and so on. And the task of those participants of the study was to change their negative emotions and thoughts they had, so anger, fear, frustration, to positive ones: love, joy, gratitude, excitement, for only 15 minutes in the course of 4 days. And after those 4 days, the amount of stress hormones decreased 16%, and the immune globulin activity was almost 50% higher, which means that the immune system, after this little exercise, was working way stronger. And this obviously affects the cellular and therefore the genetic environment too. Because if the immune system works well, then everything in the cellular environment that's kind of affecting a well-working immune system or well-working cell gets eliminated. Yeah, so that is one study, but also like really there's so many studies nowadays that shows that a change in our thought patterns, for example, and the resulting emotions from that have an impact on the regulation of, for example, also our tumor suppressor genes, but also on the genes that fight our oxidative stress, which is not good stress. Yeah, and all that after only 69 hours, which is 4 days. Yeah, I find that remarkable.
Pretty amazing, absolutely amazing. Yeah, I mean, and that's why it should be at all times that we really want to manage our mindset and our emotional state. But sometimes, when you hear of people that have been through cancer, they've come out the other side, but it's made them have a whole different way of considering how they're going to move forward. So they're very, very careful, aren't they, with their thought patterns and what they allow in, to kind of reduce as much of that negativity as possible, just so that they can create a really healthy sort of vibrational frequency, isn't it, really? It, because of what you've mentioned, though, well, how would you say that, when we look at that, because it's amazing, Joe Dispenza, he's done so much over the years, as well as lots of others. But how would you say like mindfulness and somatic movement, which is obviously a lot of what we do in Total Somatics, and the mindset principles, how would you say that's potentially going to influence epigenetic mechanisms within the body?
Yeah, so again, it all comes down to the environment we create in our bodies. And when we feel emotions like joy, gratitude, or love, and are more present in the moment, which is often the case when it comes to mindfulness, then the body switches into the rejuvenation and regeneration mode. And the inner environment is one where healing, repair, and rest can take place. So our nervous system is in the so-called parasympathetic nervous system mode. And the chemical structure of our thoughts and emotions is a different one to when we are stressed. And therefore, the chemical composition of our environment is a different one. So yeah, our body has more capacity and also more energy to function properly, to absorb important mineral vitamins, to pump oxygen into our cells, and so on. So I would say mindfulness enables the switch from stress, for example, to relaxation. And it also enables that kind of change in perception that is needed to just create, yeah, a different environment.
Well, that's a pretty good point, actually, isn't it, about the perception? Because because if we're in that stress mindset, anything that's said to us, we can perceive that as a confrontation, can't we? So we could then be really reactive. Whereas if we've managed our state and we've changed up here, the internal dialogue, something that could come across abrasive, we've perceived that and we would reply differently. Does that make sense? It's really how it lands with us, how we've perceived it, but what we're doing with our mindset and our practices to how we respond.
Yeah, 100%. So I think for me, one of the biggest learnings also for myself was the fact that nobody sees the reality I do or has the same perception than I have. And therefore, everyone is experiencing things from a different perspective, from a different perception, literally, because we all perceive the reality around us in a different way, and therefore we perceive situations different. For example, also what is a stressful situation for myself doesn't have to be stressful for you. But and yeah, I think that's definitely a very important point, because in the end it also comes down, like it always comes down, to our perception, because it's such a powerful, not really tool, but it's a powerful way of how to really deal with life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I was over the years, and it's been a conversation that's come up recently. Actually, clients have just been talking about when there's conflict at work, and they'll often say that the conflict or the issues that they're having to manage, if they're in a managerial role, is often that the person's got their own different issues that are going on internally in their internal narrative. It's really got nothing to do with the situation at work, but it's how they're not managing their own state. Does that make sense? And then it will be kind of projected on somebody else. So as you're mentioning, it's like if we can manage that, it really changes our relationship with other people as well, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. That I think, as I said, I think everything comes down to our perception. And yeah, it's especially when it comes to epigenetics also, because then our perception is responsible for what our brain receives as for example, stress. And then if our brain receives something as stress, then there's like a whole chain reaction of things that then end up in our genes and kind of have an impact on our genes in a different way than when our brain receives, for example, a signal that means relaxation or love or whatever. So our perception, I feel like, is more than just reacting to situations. It's really also affecting our health. And knowing that, I feel like it maybe sometimes it's easier to react in certain situations that normally I would just react now and I would just go with my instinct or with the first impulse that comes up. But since I have this amazing ability to consciously kind of stop for a second and make that conscious choice of changing my perception of the situation, I have basically the power in my own hands, and I think that's good to know.
Yeah, no, it's pretty cool. I was thinking, because of weaving in what you've just mentioned and then some previous things like with the gratitude and meditation, I did have a question here, which has probably been covered weaving into a lot of that aspect. But it was basically, what practical advice would you give to someone who's looking to harness the power of epigenetics to improve their health and well-being? I know we've kind of covered quite a bit, but I just thought rounding it off in that aspect.
Yeah, so basically, I think that's a good summary or a good point to summarize everything up, because as I said, I would say look at every area of your life and ask yourself whether you could improve and how you could improve in that area. And again, those changes don't have to be implemented overnight, but step by step. And I always recommend starting with like the physical side of things. So what I mean by that is, for example, the diet, our movement, maybe implementing mindfulness practices, all these kind of things. Because then once we're kind of in a good form physically, then we are more like equipped to have a look at the emotional side of things, which would be our relationships that we have with people in our life, but also with ourselves, our belief systems that are hidden in our subconsciousness, maybe emotions that are stuck in our body, trauma that we have, all these kind of things. So yeah, I would start with the physical side of things and then go to the emotional side. But most importantly, as I already said in the question before, start to change your perception of the world around you and really do that consciously. And you will see it has a massive impact on your inner environment and therefore also on your gene regulation. And there are also a lot of books and podcasts on epigenetics if you wanted to harness the power a little bit more. That's basically it.
That's brilliant. I mean, Larissa, how can people find more about you? Because what I'll do is I'll make sure we put all of the links in the show notes to this episode. I'm also going to make sure we put the link in for your TEDx talk as well, which is on epigenetics. But if you can give us some details so that people will know where to find you, or if you've got any downloadable products or anything like that, that would be awesome.
Yeah, thank you. So you can find me on my website, which is www.heartwanderers.com.au. And then I'm also on the socials, so especially Instagram and Facebook. On Instagram, it's heartwanderers _ institute. And on Facebook, it's just the Heart Wanderers Institute. So you can always follow me there and just like stay up to date. I always put like workshops that are going on there, or even if I'm at a retreat event, sometimes I also have a little discount going on for my wellness programs that I offer. So I think it might be worth to check that out. And yeah, other than that, definitely, like you said, my TED Talk, I think it's also a good start for everyone that kind of wants to dive into the whole topic, especially when it comes to the transgenerational part of epigenetics. And yeah, I think that's It's
Plenty, but what I will do is just make sure, because if somebody's walking or driving and they can't scribble these things down, I'll make sure all of those details are in the show notes, so they will definitely be able to stalk you from
I
here.
appreciate it.
So I just want to say thank you so much, Larissa, because we've been together now for a few hours, and we've covered lots of things. So the members, if they're going to watch it on the replay, they'll love it. The ones that were watching live certainly loved it, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I was making lots of notes. So plenty of content there for them to watch and then go back and then watch again, and then they can apply that information as well into their life, which is really important. So I just want to say thank you on behalf of all the Total Somatics members, but also for everyone that's listening today. I'm sure you'd agree with me. Larissa is a font of knowledge. It's been absolutely fantastic. It's really empowering to know that we can change our lifestyle, which can influence our well-being now and into the future. So that's why I thought it was a very important subject for us to cover in this podcast as well. So I'm going to say goodbye to everybody here. I'm going to say thank you again, Larissa. If you have any closing comments or anything that you've suddenly thought about that we didn't bring in, I'll leave you just to say a few words, if that's okay. But then we will just say goodbye to everyone whenever you're ready. But is there anything that you think, I want to mention before we head off?
No, I think I already mentioned a lot, but just in general, thank you very much for giving me the stage, the platform to talk about epigenetics. And I really hope that a lot of people learn about it and then start to implement all these things, all the knowledge into their life. Maybe talk about it with your family, ask them if they've ever heard of epigenetics, or ask them if they know that we can actually influence our genes. And thanks a lot. I really enjoyed talking to you and also talking to your members. I hope our path will cross again.
I'm sure they certainly will. I'm sure they will. So thank you so much again, Larissa, and everybody. Thank you for spending time with us today. We really appreciate it. As always, if you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with those that it's going to resonate with. And just going to say thank you. Take care. All our love, all our best wishes, and I will see you all very, very soon. Take care. Bye.
Thank you for joining me today. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and also forward this on to somebody you know will benefit. To learn more about pain relief, plus how to improve your health and well-being, go to totalsomatics.com. Until next time, take care.